Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Alnwick Castle podcast. I'm your host Daniel Watkins, and on today's episode we're going back in time even further than the beginnings of Alnwick Castle, as we're travelling a little bit south to Hadrian's Wall. Alnwick Castle has been a major part of life in the northeast for over 900 years, but the wall has been around for twice that length of time. As part of the events marking the 1900th anniversary of the wall, Chester's Roman fort near Hexham in Northumberland has a new exhibition, Hadrian's Wall 1900, Souvenirs from the Wall. I'll be speaking to the curator of that exhibition, Frances McIntosh, about the history of Hadrian's Wall, its significance to the northeast, and a very special item from the Alnwick Castle collection which has been loaned to Chester's for this new exhibition. Whether you're interested in the history of Roman Britain or not, Frances has some fascinating insights into these amazing items, how they were made, and what they represent within the context of the wider Roman world. Here is our conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. I am very happy to be joined on this episode of the Alnwick Castle podcast by the curator of the Hadrian's Wall 1900 Souvenirs from the Wall exhibition, English Heritage Collections Curator for Hadrian's Wall and the Northeast, Frances McIntosh. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So you can hopefully tell us, first of all, a little bit about the Souvenirs from the Wall exhibition and how it's helping to mark this huge anniversary for Hadrian's Wall.
Yep, so the Souvenirs exhibition is a small exhibition that we're hosting at Chester's Roman Fort in the museum there, and it's to highlight some really quite amazing Roman objects that a lot of people don't know about. They are the first souvenirs from Roman Britain. They're little, small copper alloy cups with enamel on, which name forts from Hadrian's Wall, and we're going to be displaying, there's 3 of them in existence, we're going to be displaying one original and one replica, along with a couple of other related cups, and that's one case. And then in the other case, we're going to have objects that we've borrowed from members of the public or found in our archive that are more recent souvenirs to kind of bring those two together. And Hadrian's Wall 1900, the celebrations of 1900 years since the construction of Hadrian's Wall, is all about celebrating the wall, but also about the people who've lived here, worked, visited in the last 2,000 years. And so we thought, let's not just have Roman archaeology on display, let's try and bridge that gap of time and say, the Romans did take souvenirs or buy souvenirs when they visited. It's not a modern invention to have a souvenir from a trip or, even from somewhere that you've lived.
I was going to say tourism and souvenirs. People have been visiting and buying things for as long as Hadrian's Wall's been there. So these souvenirs go all the way back to the beginnings of the wall.
That's right. So we think that they date to kind of the mid-2nd century. There is debate, as you can imagine. There's always academic debate about quite when they are, whether they're from the early days of the wall or after they've gone up to the Hadrian Wall and come back. But most people agree at least 2nd century, so not into the 3rd or 4th. So in that earlier period of Hadrian's Wall being constructed and occupied.
This is the Alnwick Castle podcast, so the reason we're speaking is that one of these items that you've got displayed in the exhibition has been loaned from Alnwick Castle, where we can normally see it in the Poston Tower Museum. Can you tell me a little bit about the Rudge Cup?
Yeah, so the Rudge Cup, it's one of these small copper alloy enamelled cups, or patera, depending on, or trulla, or pan. There's all sorts of different names, and get into the terminology later. Like I said, dating the 2nd century, and it's quite small. People, I think, are often surprised because they see a picture of it and it's so beautiful. But it's at the top, it's 90 millimeters in diameter, and at the bottom, it's just under 60, and it's just under 5 centimeters high. So it's really quite little. It's got beautiful decoration that's all been cast in. And the decoration, when you first look at it, it looks like the wall of a castle. So it's got crenellations, the bits that people hide behind when they're shooting arrows at each other on a castle wall. It's made up in a pattern of squares. Then in between the crenellations, there's beautiful kind of crescent shapes. And the whole of all these kind of inset spaces would have been filled with enamel. So it would have looked really, really beautiful, because copper alloy, when it's first made, is really shiny. It's kind of like our 2p pieces, our 1 and 2p pieces now. We see copper alloy in museums and it's either greeny or browny. The Rudge Cup's got kind of, aged into a brown, but it would have been so beautiful and bright with the red, the blue, the green enamel, and then this real shiny kind of bronze colour of the metal.
And this is one of the items that was taken from the wall to somewhere else by a Roman, presumably?
Yep, so it was found, it's called the Rudge Cup because it was found in a well close to what we think was a Roman villa at the Rudge Coppice, which is near Froxfield in Wiltshire. And through various kind of marriages and things, it's ended up in the family of the Dukes of Northumberland, which is why it's in the collection there. And so, presumably, it's a soldier or a high-ranking official who's been stationed up on the wall, or even maybe just visited and wanted to have a memory of Hadrian's Wall. So it's not just the decoration that makes us know that it's a souvenir from Hadrian's Wall. It's the writing on the top of it, which is really what got people excited. And so this cup, all the decoration was cast in one. So the decoration, the line of the writing is around the top, and it lists 5 names of forts on Hadrian's Wall. So this, and I apologise in advance for my Latin pronunciation, but it lists Mais, M-A-I-S, which is Bowness on Solway, Abalava, which is Bruff by Sands, Uxodunum, which is Stanwix, Camberglands, which is Castlesteads, and Banner, which is Birdoswald. So it goes from west to east. So presumably it's somebody who's stationed in that section of the wall. You know, if you were stationed in the east near, I don't know, Wallsend, Newcastle, Chester's, then you'd get a cup with those names on. But this one, it's got the western forts on.
So it's a significant item, really, for the wall, naming all these forts with the decoration on it. It's something that would have been quite prized even at the time, probably.
Absolutely, this would be a big investment. It's a specially commissioned piece, we imagine, because it's going to cost quite a lot of money to purchase. It's a level of craftsmanship to create a mould with that sort of, intricate detail, and then to enamel it afterwards. You need to know the names of the forts, so you need to have a level of literacy as a craftsperson. So we imagine it's probably a specific commission. You're not going to make these and then just hope someone buys it. It's not the sort of off-the-shelf thing, that a lot of people buy. This would be an expensive purchase, so it's going to be a high-ranking person who's bought this, because you need a fair bit of money to, purchase something like this. But that makes sense, really, because the commanding officers of the forts would tend to serve between 3 and 5 years and then move on. It's all part of the kind of career path of the upper classes that they would, they needed to serve as military officers, etc. So, someone who's served 3 or 5 years wants a memento of that, their time, and then, it was something that they could buy. Because then also, it's very portable, isn't it? It's small enough to carry away your baggage.
So we don't think it would have been used. It was probably made as a souvenir?
That's another huge debate, as well as whether we call it a cup, a trulla, a patera, etc. What it was used for. So there's 3 of these cups known. The Rudge Cup, the one we're talking about, the Island Pan, also known as the Staffordshire Mullen Pan, and the Amiens Patera. And all 3 of them possibly had handles. The Amiens Patera is the only one where the handle still exists, but the other 2, yours, the Rudge and the Island Pan, look as though they used to have a handle from kind of damage and things. So they're part of a big group of kind of deep bowled vessels that have handles. Much bigger ones and plainer ones are kind of a mess tin, so a standard issue soldier kind of piece of kit. But the smaller ones, it's not, these 3 souvenir cups fit into a group of other just decorated cups or, handled vessels, whatever you want to call them, of this size that are decorated. And there is evidence that they are used, because they're often found with quite a lot of wear or with the handle broken off or repairs and things. Whether the Rudge Cup itself was used, we don't know, and we also don't really know exactly what they were used for. Some writers say, they wouldn't be used for drinking out of because they're too small, but this sort of size group, they hold about 160 millilitres. So that's kind of an average wine glass, isn't it, really? I know we have a 125 or 175, they're kind of your measures in a pub, aren't they? So that's definitely an option, and they're often found with wine strainers. So wine in the Roman period was often mixed with spices and honey and other things. You'd strain it to get all the gubbins out before you drank it. So the fact that these pans are found with the wine strainers adds more weight to that. But you also see pictures and depictions of them being used in religious services. So kind of used to pour wine or water, either on an altar or as another offering in a religious ceremony. So there's multiple uses. So whether or not the Rudge Cup was made just to go and sit on someone's, mantelpiece or the equivalent, it's almost impossible to know, because also, although people say, oh, they're often found with the handle broken off. That's probably indicative of wear. That's also just the weakest point. So it probably doesn't take that much for it to, get broken off.
And these are items that are nearly 2,000 years old.
Well, exactly, yeah.
So let's get onto the terminology. Is there much of a difference between a cup, a patera, a trulla? What makes one and another?
So the naming of the three ones is a complete modern thing. So when the Rudge Cup was found, which was in the 1720s, they decided it was cups. They call it the Rudge Cup. The Amiens Patera was found in the 1940s, and in France they decided that's what it's called. So its modern name is the Amiens Patera. The Staffordshire Moorlands Pan, it was kind of given the pan name because that's a bit more generic. And Ralph Jackson, who was at the British Museum at the time, kind of was writing when he was writing up the island pan, says probably the best word to use for them all, or what the Romans might have called them, might be a patera, which is a handled kind of deep, bold vessel. But the Romans also used the word trulla, and we don't know exactly what that was. Some antiquarians in the 18th and 19th century called these sorts of vessels skillets, but that's not a relevant word because skillet, it tends to be a pan that you cook on, and these were never used for that sort of thing. So the three souvenir cups or vessels or pans, their names are completely just of their time, and that's what they were given. But now everyone knows it as the Rudge Cup or the Amiens Patera. So you can't call it the Rudge Pan because everyone say, well, what's that? It's known as the Rudge Cup, but it doesn't mean anything in terms of, just because all three of them are called different things doesn't mean they were used for different purposes, or the Romans saw them as different things. They're just, it's a terminological pickle, really, because we don't really know what the Romans called them. And also, we always don't necessarily know exactly what they were used for, so we can't even use that as their name. So Ralph Jackson, he says he thinks pan is more of the general neutral term, but like I say, we can't rename the Rudge Pan because too many people know it as a Rudge Cup.
And the first part of the name, Rudge, Amiens, places like that, that's where they were found rather than where they were made or where they originated. They all originated from Hadrian's Wall area.
Yeah, they all originated from Hadrian's Wall. So the Amiens Patera is the one that got the furthest. It's in France. The Rudge Cup was down in Wiltshire, and then the Staffordshire Moorlands Pan was found in the parish of Ilam, which is in the Staffordshire area. So they've all travelled. Whether that's the only place that they travelled, or whether they travelled around before they got buried in those spots, who knows. But for example, the Rudge Cup being found in a well alongside a supposed Roman villa, it's not been excavated, so we don't know. But that would make sense because it's going to be a richish, at least, person who's purchased it. You've got to be pretty wealthy to have a villa. So if it was a part of their, their possessions, it makes sense that it's outside a villa. But we know quite some of these would have had long lives and been kind of looked after and kept, or curated. So there's another object that we're borrowing from Tully House Museum, which is the broom patera. So again, someone just called it a different name. And this isn't a Hadrian's Wall souvenir one. It's just another beautifully decorated cup of the same form. And I wanted to borrow it to show how it's like our souvenirs today. Everyone's got teacups in their house. Some of them you've bought from the supermarket, some of them you've bought from, a nice shop, and some of them you bought from on holiday, and it'll say, I visited Hadrian's Wall or I visited Corfu. That's kind of what these souvenir cups are from Hadrian's Wall. They're not a whole new type of object. The Romans knew exactly what they were. They've just added the souvenir part onto it. So the broom patera was at least 100 years old before it was buried. It was buried in a cremation burial in the cemetery outside Broome Roman Fort. So it could be that, the Rudge Cup had been kept hold of for a long time before it was buried, even if it's a treasured kind of memory of somewhere that your family member, served or enjoyed their time. So that's one of the reasons that dating of them is tricky. Partly because not a lot of them have been found in very good context places, but partly because we know they probably would have been kept hold of and treasured.
Yeah, because you were saying that someone would spend 3 to 5 years at the wall, so there's a lot of chance for these items to go to all kinds of different places and have all kinds of lives afterwards. They probably just didn't stay in one place.
Yeah, exactly. So, the officers, if they're of the real high kind of senatorial class or equestrian class, and they have to go around and do different jobs. It's kind of the cursus honorum, it's called, the public kind of like they're aiming to become, senators. And so they've got to, serve as a military officer. They'll have a kind of a civic time. But also some of them wouldn't have been following that route, but they'd just serve for a while and then go and do something else. So yeah, probably the people who bought them, that's why they have ended up in different places, because they didn't serve the whole career on the wall.
And that means that we can't just take these as items on their own. They're part of a wider Roman setting and a wider context about not just Hadrian's Wall, but the whole period in history. What can these items tell us about things like the craftsmanship that went into it and how Hadrian's Wall was considered in the Roman Empire?
Well, I think in terms of craftsmanship, they're just, they're absolutely beautiful and real evidence of skill, because to create those pieces would have, required a lot of skill in order to make the mold, to create, the piece, and then to enamel it. Like I say, you've got to have some form of literacy, because you've got to spell the forts right, or at least close enough that you're going to recognise them. Most of the forts are spelled slightly differently on all of the cups, but that's not unusual. We get multiple spellings of all sorts of things on stone inscriptions and sculpture. It shows that there's got to be then a setting which is big enough, and an economy which is big enough to support a craftsperson of that skill, and enough of a market to keep them there. No one's really certain, but they tend to agree that the cups were probably made in Carlisle, because that's the biggest place in the western section of the wall that would have been able to support that sort of craftsperson. It's very rare to find good evidence of metalworking, and less so for metalworking, but particularly enamelling and glassworking, because both those materials, actually enamel and metal, can be melted back down if something goes wrong. So you don't often find great evidence. So you will tend to find either the molds or some of the tools to give you a clue that something was being made there. And there's a site near Leeds called Castleford where they found molds for enamelled vessels, a different type to these that we're talking about. But that's really rare to find that level of evidence, because the Romans were very good at recycling. So if a craftsperson had made a Rudge Cup version 2 and it had gone wrong, they just melt the metal back down and go again. So we haven't found, the workshop or any molds or anything like that in Carlisle. But if you think about the craftsperson that would be required and the level of market economy that you need to support something like that, Carlisle's a sensible place.
So there's a suggestion that these items are version 1 and version only. Were they probably unique, or might there have been more at one time?
I mean, there might be more of them. My understanding is they're probably made in a one-use mould because of the complexity of things. They might not have been, we've not found those molds, so maybe they could be, but I imagine they're, specific commissions. There's not going to be a huge market for them, although we've found 3, so that's quite a lot. But for instance, the Island pan, or the Staffordshire Moorns pan, that's different to the Rudge Cup because it's different decoration, but the Rudge Cup has the decoration and the inscription cast in as part of the original design. Whereas the Island pan, the decoration is much more kind of Celtic in style, and it's 8 roundels filled with kind of, they call them comma shapes, much more kind of floral and flowing. But then the inscription at the top is carved into the metal afterwards. So that could have been an enamelled cup that somebody's made as a generic enamelled cup, and then someone's come along and said, I'd quite like to put the names of the fort on there. So that one's not initially made as a souvenir from Hadrian's Wall, but there are other pans that have also used that top band to put an inscription on unrelated to Hadrian's Wall. So that's quite nice, because it shows the link between kind of these beautiful pans and then these, extra special ones that are the Hadrian's Wall souvenirs ones. But so the Amiens Patera and the Rudge Cup are very similar in decoration, but the Amiens Patera has 6 fort names on. So it's definitely a different mould. Even if a craftsperson's making multiple ones, if they're having to create a new mould, they're always going to be slightly different, aren't they? Even if it did work to the same pattern every time.
Speaking of work and levels of work, you've put a huge amount of work into preparing these items for the exhibition and getting them ready for this big anniversary. What have you found most fascinating about the process of gathering these items together and finding out more about them?
So as a Roman archaeologist and someone who works on Hadrian's Wall, I've always known about the cups and the souvenir pans, but actually, getting down to the nitty gritty of, so those are the same decoration, but it's different in this way, or this is the fine spot, and that maybe affects what we might know about them. It's the fact that people have studied them for quite a long time, and there's a book in 2009 when there was an exhibition at Tully House about them, and I've been looking through, and actually there's still quite a lot we don't know, and I quite like that. And I'm also quite, if I ever put on an exhibition, I was quite honest about what we don't know, because I think people like that. They don't want to be kind of told a fudge, or you just pretend you know everything. I think it's quite good to say, well, these are things we know, this is the evidence, and here's some suggestions of what it might be. So we're going to be quite honest and say we don't know what they were used for or who bought them, but here are some, sensible suggestions. And I just think they're just really beautiful objects, and that's why. So I've got the Rudge Cup, and I have a replica, a beautiful replica of the Saffron Mullins pan, but then I'm also borrowing the Broom Patra and then the Winterton pan, which is in North Lincolnshire. That one's never been out of North Lincolnshire, because I wanted to put them in their wider context, like we've been talking about, of these small, deep little cups with handles or not with handles, and show how it's just part of a wider kind of setting of some really beautiful crafts work that was available in Roman Britain. And you could get it in different styles. You could personalise it, so you could add the names of the forts if you wanted to, or you buy it with swirls on instead of crenellations. And I think they show that individualization that could be added.
To just finish off with a big question, what does working on Hadrian's Wall mean to you, especially in big anniversary years like this? And what does the wall mean to the Northeast as a region, as a landmark?
So for me personally, I think what I love about it is it's just constantly fascinating. You can never know everything, even an expert on Hadrian's Wall, and there's always new things to discover, whether that's new excavations or just looking through the boxes in stores and archives and talking to different people. And I'm really lucky. My office is at the end of the museum at Corbridge, and I can hear people kind of reading the panels and labels, and just watching them or hearing them being so astonished that this beautiful object was made 2,000 years ago, or understanding a bit of Latin because of the way we've described the inscription. It just never gets old, the fact that we can help people understand life here through either the sites or for me it's always the objects I like the best. And I think for the Northeast, Hadrian's Wall's just always been there, hasn't it? It's a silly thing to say, but for 1900 years it has been there, and it's meant different things to different people all the way through, hasn't it? In the 16th, 17th, 18th century, it was just a place to get stone to build your houses. From the 19th century, it started to become a real source of fascination for archaeologists, antiquarians, and then tourism built. And, now it's a huge, kind of economic, boon to the area. And you talk to people who are so proud that they live near Hadrian's Wall and find it, they're kind of like, yeah, we live near Hadrian's Wall. So it's just been that, constant for such a long time, but has changed its meaning depending on who you are or what time you live in.
It's a big part of what makes this part of the country somewhere that people all around the world want to come and see.
Well, exactly. Well, it's a World Heritage Site, and that gives it, rightly, it gives it a bit of kudos, but it also often puts it on people's list, don't they? Because you do have visitors who come because it's a World Heritage Site, because they realise that specialness that is inferred by the fact that it's on the list. So, yeah, it's great to have it recognised like that.
So if people want to put it on their list to come and see this exhibition and see these cups or pans or patras together all in one place, which is something that won't happen very often at all, when can they come and see the exhibition?
So they can come from the 1st of September until the 30th of October at Chester's Roman Fort and Museum, just outside of Hexham.
Excellent. Frances McIntosh, thank you very much for joining us today, and good luck with the exhibition.
Thank you.
As Frances mentioned, the Rudge Cup will be on display as part of the exhibition at Chester's Roman Fort this autumn. If you'd like to see the cup back at Alnwick Castle, just visit the Poston Tower Museum of Antiquities and Archaeological Finds from the beginning of our 2023 season. If you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please do let us know by emailing podcast@alnwickcastle.com or tweeting us @AlnwickCastle. Share it with your friends and recommend it to anyone you think might be interested. And if you can leave us a rating or review, that would be much appreciated. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks' time. But until then, I've been Daniel. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.